Introduce yourselves. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Ready to chill. Sure, yeah, let's do all that then. Transition. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session today. This is sponsored by Developing and Equipping All to Lead, DEAL. This is programming aimed at peer-to-peer development. So we learn from each other to develop ourselves in new ways to contribute to all the activities we do on the job. So today we have a panel to join us and talk about how to put goals into motion. So we often receive goals from our bosses, perhaps things we set into motion with our colleagues, ideas we have on the job that we want to execute, but we may not know how to get there. And so we have asked this group to join us and share their tips and expertise on how they put goals into motion and share them with you. I will let them introduce themselves in a moment. Once they're finished, we're then going to do an activity with those of you attending so that we can practice and begin to learn ourselves how to visualize those goals coming into fruition. So, forgot to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Wallstrom-Helgren. We'll wrap it up at the end. You can learn a little bit more about DEAL and how to get involved if you'd like in the future. And on that note, I will hand it off to our panelists. Here you go, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Pariseau. I work in the Office of Academic Affairs as the university's academic curriculum manager.
Hi, Joey Carrillo. I work in the Office of Institutional Advancement, and I just oversee fundraising operations for the university at the annual level, and have been here for about 3 years now.
Hi, my name is Nathan Robbins. I work in graduate admissions. I've also been here for about 3 years, and I kind of oversee our domestic student recruitment efforts at the graduate level.
Good afternoon. My name is Shavonn Nowlin. I serve as the Assistant Director for Residence Life and Conferences. I also oversee 2 of the residence halls here on campus, and I've also been here for 3 years in September. So I would say just dive in. Let us know what you do. Interrupt each other. Have a conversation and tell us about your goals. I can start or anything. Okay. Right ahead. All right. So for me, goal setting is really, really simple. I'm a list person, and I kind of have a step-by-step for every single thing. Did I put it on the list, first of all? Step one, make the list. And then like the follow-up pieces and communication. I also like to really truly utilize like resources. So if there's something like, for example, I think back mostly like to when I was preparing for graduate school. That's what I think about when I was trying to really like, okay, I got to stick to my list. What was really important to me for that was just to make sure that I followed up with people who either had some type of resource or some type of advice for me, and making sure that those conversations happened, making sure that I took notes, and that I had somewhere, like I keep a notebook. So every year I buy a new notebook and I keep everything in there for the year pretty much. That is kind of like my go-to. So I can always go back to whatever notebook I was using for that year to see what notes I took for whatever the task was. I got some notebook people out there. And then, like I said, the communication piece is really important with utilizing with those resources for every goal, like whether it's work related. But grad school was the main thing that kept popping up in my head, because I remember I was really like, I got to follow up with this person. I got to call this person back. I got to make sure that I got this application. I also use spreadsheets a lot too. And I love Google. So I use Google Calendar, Google Notes, Keep, Google Hangout, like for calls that I want to face-to-face someone and I can't like sit with them in person. Those are kind of the main tools that I use. And then, like I said, just that communication piece. I think that has been the most important thing with goal setting is that, like, I've heard so many people saying, like, communicate with the people. Like, if it's a task at work and I can't get it done or something like that, then I need to let my supervisor know ahead of time. Because that does happen. Some people are like, no, you cannot complete a task. What? And then there are those late nights where you have to kind of like make sure that, you got to stay up a little late to work on a project if it didn't get done by that time period that you needed to get done by. But I think communication is that, like I said, that's the part I always go back to. Like, I need to let people know if I'm setting a goal, if we're working on something in the office and I'm not going to get it complete by that timeline, then what is the next timeline? And then I got to work a little bit harder to get it done. I won't talk about everything. I'll save some. Sorry.
So for me, I think all of us have notebooks up here. So I think we all use notebooks. And writing down, making lists is absolutely something that I do on a daily basis. Every day when I come into the office, I make a list for that day, the tasks that I need to accomplish, but then also keeping sort of a larger long-term goals, projects list that I can kind of keep track of, see where I'm making progress on things, see where I need to kind of step up and work a little bit harder on some projects. For me, it all started in undergrad, actually. You know, I get those big desk calendars that are huge. I still have one on my desk. We order one every year. Thank you. And it was, you know, I got my syllabus for my class, and I would just go through and write down the due dates for everything, every paper, every test, every midterm, everything that I had for all of my classes that semester, and I posted it above my desk in my dorm room. And so that way every day I got up, I was working, I was whatever, I could see it's September. I don't really have anything due right now, but let me look ahead to November. Okay, I've got a paper that's due that second week. I've got a midterm the third week. What can I go ahead and get started on? What can I go ahead and knock out while it's slow here in September and we're just getting started? What can I get done now to make it easier for myself when it kind of gets hectic later? So writing those goals down, writing down what I need to accomplish, breaking it down into, okay, a paper that I would write isn't just, oh, I sit down, I type, wow, it's done. It's the bibliography, it's reading source material, it's writing drafts. So kind of breaking down those larger goals and those larger projects into something that is more manageable on maybe not even a day-by-day basis, but a week-by-week sort of, you know, what can I kind of chip away at and accomplish a little bit more gradually so that, oh, come October, like, oh, it's done. It's not due for 2 more weeks, but it's done. And now I have nothing to do for 2 weeks except get started on the next project. And writing them down, doing that ahead of time, and I think kind of keeping those long-term goals, it allows you to prioritize like that. What's the most complex project that I have going on? What's the most complex thing that's coming up? What is sort of simpler that maybe I can put on the back burner for right now? A lot of people I know like to do their easiest tasks first. I'm the opposite. I like to start on the complex stuff. I can do the easy stuff later. When I need a break from the complex, I can go in and do that 5-10 minute project and be done with it. And of course, doing. A lot of people plan, a lot of people prep, a lot of people do everything they need to do to sort of be successful, except do it. The hardest task to accomplish is the one you never start on. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. So, like, plan and then do it. If you never get started, you'll never finish it. So, theses taught me that. Theses taught me that.
So, I feel very fortunate because I've learned a lot about like the planning process since I've got here. Especially since in IA, what I really like is that we have like top level sort of department goals, and then in all of our individual teams, you know, alumni relations, annual giving, major gifts, events, all of our sub teams in the office are supposed to align our sort of individual team goals to the top level goals, which is really nice. I really like that because I did not have that before I came here, and it was a little challenging. So I love that, and I think that that is such a great thing, like thinking, you know, department wide in terms of like goals that you should be working on that you know feed into the bigger picture. I really like that, and I also think for me accountability is really big, especially you know. When we think about like how are we going to get there, thinking about all of the subtasks that go into each individual thing is really important for me too. And I think that also like using the team, like if you're working on a team of people, because in you know in the kind of work that we do in IA, it's so collaborative, and so you know I can't meet my goals if everyone on the team isn't contributing. Especially as we sort of are working in a field that's always changing and kind of always like absorbing different roles into one role, and so now you have a lot more responsibility, and so like that planning and that organization and teamwork to me are super key to like meeting goals and getting things done. And like I'm very fortunate, I feel like, to have a really good team that like does really like step up when we need that to happen. But what I found very helpful too, especially in times of like transition, as I feel like we're almost always in transition, is like really I recently this year kind of like created this like master spreadsheet of like, okay, here are all of the teams, and then on the other side, here are all of the projects and tasks, and sort of looking at everything in one place, and then kind of from there drilling down individually to get more in depth. And I feel like multiple layers and multiple views of like 10,000-foot view. All right, now let's get a little more detailed, I think is really important, because we have a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations, but making sure that we're all on the same page and having that in a Google Sheet where everyone has access to it. You can put your comments there. Like, I'm also Google crazy. I love Google so much. Just with all the collaborative work that we do, I feel like it's super important. So definitely like advocating for that top level goals for your department, if you don't have it, I feel like is really great. And then like making sure that everyone on your team really knows what they're supposed to be doing, and how that fits into the bigger picture so that the team can meet team goals. And then in terms of the individual level, I love what you said about just like doing. Like people think I'm crazy when I say that my email is at 0 every day, because I just like answer it as it comes. Like, and if I'm like working on something and I see something quick and it needs a quick response, I'll just respond right away. And like, I know some people get like a crazy volume of emails, and I like that volume has grown since I've been here, but I know it's probably not as large as maybe some people, that are overseeing large teams. But I think that's really big, because I feel like that can be a time suck. And if you let it pile up, like people procrastinate on email, I feel like that tends to be a huge burden on people. So I try to have my email be at 0. And it like works very well, so that I never feel like I have a fire. Because I've like looked at the email, I've addressed it. If it's something that requires something more, then I will put it on my to-do list. Because my email is part of my to-do list, but if I answer it quickly, it never makes it, because it's done right away and handled and read and done. And so I feel like that's really big for me. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's crazy. And I just like, it's not because I stay on top of it. And I feel like if I'm not on top of it, that's when it becomes crazy. So I feel like that's super important.
And I think for a lot of people, having an inbox that isn't at 0, having an inbox that has hundreds of unread emails in it is kind of anxiety producing. So working toward a 0 inbox every day for me as well is something that I try to do. It's not always at 0, but I try to get it there. At most, it's got 5 or 6 emails in it. Something that I've actually found really useful, talking about sort of breaking down a goal. If a goal for me is 0 inbox, which it usually is, you can actually adjust your Gmail settings so that it only shows you 10 unread emails. I address those 10. And then I go do something else for a minute, and then I come back and I address 10 more and 10 more. So I'm not like, oh my God, I have 100 unread emails. I have 10.
Right.
I can do 10. Anybody can do 10. It might take me a few minutes, and there may be 1 or 2 tricky ones in there that I come back and readdress later on, but that was like a eureka sort of moment for me when I figured out I could do that.
And then also I kind of use my inbox is also like this is something you can prioritize them. So like my inbox, like something unread is something, okay, yes, I haven't read it. But then you can everything else, and then you can actually make out different boxes for your Gmail. And I found that pretty useful as well. And then I'm a color coder and labeler, so everything in my inbox is labeled. I have 2 other emails that I'm like, I have my personal IIT email, then I have 2 other emails that I'm responsible for. One specifically like conferences. Like I am probably really anal with my staff about the labels. Like when you respond to an email, label it and archive it and get it out the inbox. That is probably like one of my biggest pet peeves, like at work, and like getting things out and labeled, because then I always can go back and reference whatever the case might be. If it comes back in my inbox, that's fine too, but as long as I've gotten it out of my inbox, I think like I would ideally like to have a 0 inbox every day. However, It's just not realistic.
Doesn't always
Yeah,
happen.
it doesn't work all the time.
No, it doesn't happen a lot. And but at the end of the day, like one of the things that one of my supervisors was like, you know, if you can't get the 100%, like this is the answer to something, at least email a person and say, hey, I seen your email. I am working on blah, blah, blah. I will get back to you in this amount of time with this answer, hopefully. And then also helping people to understand, like, you know, I'm not sitting there looking at my email. And in terms of work-life balance, I have to, at 5 o'clock or after a certain time, say I'm not looking at my email because that is just important to me in terms of my life. And living where I work. So I have to set those boundaries. So when I do get to the office the next day or like Monday and I see an email from someone at 10 p.m., I'm like, yep, today, just got this email. But I do use my inbox as a to-do list. And like, I think when you mentioned like that does become something. If it's something that I need to do, then it does get on the to-do list. And I color code everything. That's the other thing that is probably crazy, but Post-its, to-do lists, different groups of what needs to work, like everything is in a different color because that just helps to make my brain say, okay, this is this and this is that. So yeah, sorry, chime in.
That's okay. On one final note, in regard to email, one way to cut down on email that I tried this semester, it was actually brought up to me by a student that works for me. It's an app called Slack. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. It's awesome. And for me, it was a game changer because what was happening was I was sending so many emails to the student. You know, I had a team of anywhere from like 12 to 15 students reporting into me, and it just felt like a lot of people. And it was just really hard for me to like always make sure they always knew what was happening, announcements for the week, get your timesheet in, all of these different things. And like, it was a lot of email and they weren't reading it. And so it wasn't even effective communication. And I feel like even at the professional staff level, we experience that with the barrage of emails that we get. And so for anyone that's working on a team of people on a project, it works great to use Slack because you essentially set up channels, and some channels are relevant to some people, but not others. And so if you see that something comes in on a particular channel, but you're not really on that event, you're on the communications for the event, you'll focus on that channel so that when something comes in, it's not clouding your email box. And you can set different, and the great thing is like you can totally, they have this feature called @channel where you can like, if you need everyone on your team to like see something right away, you do an @channel on the app and it will send like a banner notification to the person's phone regardless of their like notification settings, which sounds like kind of scary and invasive, but it's actually really great, especially if it's like, we have 10 more minutes and I have 3 people who haven't submitted their timesheets, please do so now. Because it's like everyone like needs to know that that's a big, you know, and you could even do that for just individual people. But I think it's really nice to like anything that is a 911 type thing of like, oh, here's a fire. You can communicate that, and it's not only in the app, but it's also on the phone. And I actually like that working with students because half the time that's their preferred method of communication. And I feel like a lot of people nowadays like are on their phone. It just kind of depends on like work-life balance and stuff. Like I like that you said that because that is super important. And for me too, because I am a part-time student, I go to the law school, and like last semester I had a day class during the time that I had students working in the office. And so I would be slacking them from class, and I could do it from my computer. And they could like get it on their phone and they'll see it. And so it's a cool communication tool. I went from sending a ton of emails a week to my students to none of them reading it to sending 0 emails for the entire semester and always being in the loop of really like, because there are certain channels that I just don't need to care about. And there are certain channels that I do. So Slack is really great for anyone that's looking for communication tools to cut down on the email cloud, because I feel like that's a huge problem.
Well, my workload here at the university is more project-based. So what I typically do is put together a comprehensive calendar, and I use an Excel spreadsheet. And what other people spoke on and what I would like to echo is breaking everything down into its component, discrete parts, because a giant project can seem really overwhelming. But if you break it into all the individual steps, you know, oh, I have 5 minutes, I can do that one. I have 10 more minutes, I can do this one. And a crucial element that I've found for that is really thinking about who or what office you have to interface with to get that job done. And what I personally like to do is anything that requires external input or collaboration, I like to get those started first, because you never know what other offices' calendar looks like. It might be a high priority project for you, but it certainly isn't for another office. And just the common courtesy of not throwing something at someone last minute. So I like to get that done so those wheels can get turning, because I know I can control my own work output. I can stay here till 10 o'clock at night if something needs to get done, but I can't expect other offices to do that. So that's what I like to do. And that way I always have a status next to each of these tasks too, so that I can put what the latest status was, someone's getting back to me on this, or this is going to be delivered on X date. So if you have that moment in the morning where you have anxiety, like, oh my gosh, did I ever follow up with so-and-so, or what's going on with that project? I don't have to spend 15 minutes trying to think of where I left that project. I can just review it, get the anxiety out of the way, move on with the rest of my day. And a lot of this, I work in an office that's very documentation oriented. And that was new for me. And at first it feels kind of cumbersome, but over time it's really, really helpful because we share everything on a shared drive. You can see where everything is with every other project. If someone's done a similar project in the past, there's always a template. There's always a manual. I have a whole comprehensive manual for different projects I do at what date I do this and who needs to be contacted and what needs to go where. And it does feel painful when you're doing it, but future you is so happy that you did it. So, and it saves you so much time in the future because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do a project. And it might not be the same project, but it might touch on similar aspects that you can at least take something from what you've done before. Another thing that other people touched on is just do it, which is totally true because procrastination is a huge problem for everybody. And there are certain aspects of my job that, like you, I just don't really love doing. So, and some of them are the more, intellectual basis, like a lot of mental energy to actually get to do that. So what I do sometimes is I trick myself into just saying, I'm going to work on this for 15 minutes as like my do good thing of the day, and then move on to something easy like email. But once you get started, you're like, I can do another half hour. I see where I'm going with this. And you keep going. Before you know it, you actually have a draft or at least a section of something. So it's silly that I have to play games with myself, but it actually seems to work for me because everybody has something that's like pulling teeth to do in your job that you really would prefer not to. I also have a comprehensive communication calendar, which I especially use because a lot of my job depends on outside collaboration. And I have it down to a point where it's like really obnoxious with like my Google Calendar where I'll be like, remind Professor X on this date about this. And I'll have it staggered out in advance because it's very easy to lose the threads of something you're working on if you don't hear from somebody. And you feel like your communication or your request just went into the ether. And this way, like over the years, I'm like, what's the appropriate lapse of time before I can contact somebody about this again? So I've kind of figured that out. And then I actually put it on the calendar as an event that I have to contact that person. So that works for me. It might be a little obsessive for some people, but some institutions or people on campus really do need the nudge because if they're faculty members, they might have had great intentions to respond to you, but then they went into midterms and it completely slipped their mind. So, and I also try to dovetail what I'm doing around known calendars. I work with academics, so that's the academic calendar. There are certain flashpoints when anything I sent will be ignored right now, so this is not a good time. And I'm sure with admissions and housing other offices, you have your own flashpoints, but it's good to be aware of the context that you're working on and when is an unreasonable time to approach somebody or some office about something, because there really are kind of blackout dates for certain offices where you should really contact them before that happens or just admit that you need to wait another month. So that's really, I guess, what I use to get my job done, just to the nature of the project-based academic goals that we have.
So you all mentioned anxiety in some form or the other.
What does that say about us?
We all have a lot. I mean, we have big jobs. Some of our offices are tight on staff. The university has a lot of goals in and of its own right, and we're all working to contribute towards them. But how do you, when you're setting a new goal or you're in the middle of one and you're having those feelings, like action is good, but like how do you get to the action point, like from the feeling, or what other methods do you have to manage being overwhelmed by your workload or not being at zero inbox or whatever it may be, respectively? Can you speak to those things?
Well, for me personally, I have anxiety waiting to do stuff. I do much better if I just jump right in and start doing it. And then I feel like something is beginning to be ticked off of my task list. Just sitting there thinking about it is not good. And putting it on a list and giving it sort of a name and a concreteness also helps me.
I completely agree. Sometimes it really is just best to just start. I know it sounds kind of weird, like, oh, I don't really have a plan on how exactly I'm going to execute this. But like you said, saying like, all right, I'm just going to chip away at this for 30 minutes. And sometimes you make more progress than you think you will. And that becomes an hour, and before you know it, yeah, you've got a tangible, completed portion of that task. Sometimes breaking it into those smaller tasks does really help. Seeing that, like, okay, this looked like a really cumbersome project to begin with, but now that I see, like, oh, it's really just creating this timeline, creating this email draft, sending it to the appropriate person, and then having them okay, that's not that bad. It was worse in my head than when I actually wrote it down and thought it out. But of course, there comes a point where writing things down isn't actually accomplishing the task. So I think people sometimes have have good intentions of planning things out, but have a tendency to just keep planning and keep planning and keep planning and then not actually executing. And I know that's something we've all mentioned as well, is just do it. It's Nike, just do it. Get started. Try to get something done, even if it's just setting aside, like Sarah said, a little bit of time to try to start it off. And you may find that, okay, I'm making more progress than I thought I would make.
I would also add, like, just kind of what Joey mentioned earlier, like, if you're working with team, and what Sarah mentioned, if you're working with other departments, I think that kind of, because we can tend to get very siloed and focused on what our department needs to accomplish. And if you know that there's a project that needs to involve another office, I think, like, I know, like, that's a pet peeve of our department, like, when we are literally, like, in the middle of moving and someone's like, oh yeah, I need for this group to move in, and I'm like, no. It's not quite how that's going to work today. And of course, we definitely will make accommodations where we can, but I think that delegation is very important, and understanding, like, the art of it. It's not like I'm just giving someone my work. I, like, this past year, I've had a lot of health complications, and so I had a major surgery. And when I came back into the office, it was like, okay, you're coming back into the fold, and then now you got to figure out, okay, what's being worked on, like, what did you start on before you left, and what did you have to pass off, and then where is it at now, and how to pick back up. And I have an intern. My intern has been amazing in the fact that, they're like, give me some tasks, give me something to do. I think that also folks understanding, like, some of those tasks, especially for, I think, like, newer professionals, like, understanding, like, a task is not, just a task. This is, like, a skill set that you're learning for future profession. Like, that's super important. I think that, like, I think back when you were mentioning about, like, departmental goals and breaking all those pieces down, these last couple of years, our department has been very, very, very instrumental in, like, what are our goals for our department, and having a Google Sheet. And every single one-on-one with my intern, I'm looking at those goals. We are talking about the goals every single time. Who's going to do what? How is it going to get done? What help do we need? Do we need to reach out to someone else in the department or someone outside of the department? And then, again, going back to, like I said, the communication and the follow-up piece, like, that's super important. Like you mentioned earlier, like, with my email, if I need to follow up with something, I have a box that's like follow up. I have a label that says follow up. And pretty much every day I'm looking at that label like, okay, let me go into that box and see, did I actually follow up with some of those things that need to be followed up? And sometimes I did, and sometimes I don't. I think to help with the anxiety, I'm also a realist. And the reality is, yes, all of these tips and tricks that we say that we're doing, we want to get them done. But the reality is there's only so much time in the day, and then you have to also take care of yourself. And I think, like, with my health, I've also had to realize, no, you got to take care of yourself. You can't do the work. You won't be here around to do the work if you don't take care of yourself. And so with the actual goal setting, like I've had to kind of revisit and think about, okay, my like having anxiety about a project getting done. I've had to think about, okay, who can I bring in that can help me with this project? Is this something I can tackle on my own? Is this someone that I need to bring in from another department or another institution? Do I need to go out and benchmark with someone else and something that they've done? What are all those pieces that go into it and then actually get it done? Like the planning piece is more so really important to me because I know there's a lot of stuff that I can get done, but I also am real and I'm like, this is something I can't get done. And who can I like either delegate it to, or who do I know is really looking for that skill set for them to work on and learn? And how can I, as either supervisor or as assistant director, how can I help that person to get to learning that skill set so that they can also be involved in this project and set in that goal that we set for our department?
I would echo the delegation and the art of the delegation, because I think a skill that I've learned, because essentially since I've graduated college, I have worked with students every single year. And so like I've learned, the value of working with students, undergrads, grads, students, interns. And I like training. And I think it's very important, like when you're delegating, to really think about it from this is what I need done, and these are the things that go into it. Does this student have the ability to do those things? And I feel like, especially now, at a place where we just have to try to get a lot done on less staff, the one thing that we do have is students. We have a lot of students who want on-campus jobs, who need on-campus jobs, who need the experience. And I'm very personally proud of the fact that one of the strengths that I feel like I have is training and working with people and students. And you would be very surprised at some of the things that students do. And I essentially outsourced, because when I started, I was assistant director over just 2 programs. And just months ago, I was given all of, annual giving to kind of manage and oversee. And I have essentially in many ways outsourced the assistant director position to different students and worked with them on, here are the things that I was doing, and I thought about okay, if I need to get this done, here are the things that okay, does the student have access in the database to this? Do they have training on how to pull a query? Do they know how to sort a spreadsheet? That's an important one. And I think just those basic questions that people feel well, by the time I do all those things, I might as well have done it myself. But the thing is that you're investing in that time in the future, because if I train him once on doing all of these things, then the next time I need it done, he's going to be able to do it. And then that's where my free time will come. And I feel like a lot of my colleagues struggle with delegating because they're well, the students can't really handle these things, when really they can. You just need to be able to meet them where they are and take them where you want them to be. And then they learn in the process. And so not only are you fulfilling their interests, but you're also getting your stuff done. So I really I echo that a lot. And that is, I feel like, a reason why I have been able to try to take on more things, because I've been able to delegate really well. And it is a skill and it is an art. And I think that knowing when, it is a fine line of knowing when no, I should just do this, or no, I can train someone to do this. This is recurring, and this is something that's administrative and something that I can train a student to do, and that would be effective and meaningful. So I think that's really important as well.
So real quick before we move on to the activity, well, delegation is awesome when it's available to you. Do you all have some ideas on how to move forward with a goal or a project when you don't have a team, student workers, or staff to delegate? And maybe that's something you do in your current role, but maybe it's something you're going to draw on from prior experience or when you were a student, like Nate was talking about earlier. Not everyone has that opportunity, and it might be something that's a good skill to keep in mind for future reference, depending on career development. But I do want to make sure that we provide tips and opportunities for everyone who might be tuning in with us.
Well, I can't delegate, so thank you. I'm unable to delegate, but so you do your level best to get as much work done as you can. But one thing I've found really helpful, and it's kind of started percolating with me when I worked at the College of Architecture, and that's design-based for students. And I remember one of the faculty members telling me, like, the students will sit here and play with their design and play with their design, but ultimately you have to print and you have to present. And for my own work, you can get something really good, but at a point you just have to publish it, or you have to push it forward, or you have to send something out. And it may not be 100% how you want it to be. But if it's 95%, maybe it's good enough. And then you can move on to your next task. Because I have seen a lot of people get bogged down on perfectionism. And I think it's a laudable goal, but I think you can get too much in the weeds with that. And you have to, at a point, just say, I have to send something out. I'm going to do the best I can and move on, because we're all working with limited time and limited resources. So sometimes just doing your best is the best it's going to be. So I think that's what I do personally.
And I feel like we kind of mentioned earlier, being realistic about if you don't have the ability, I can delegate, but I don't like to delegate. If you don't have that option, or if you don't want that option, being realistic about what you can accomplish. Don't take on too many tasks. Don't take on too many projects. If you know yourself, if you know I can't accomplish all of this, or if you find, even if you think you can accomplish all of it and later you find you can't, find a partner, find someone to pull that to pull into that project with you, and even if it's someone above you or a peer, someone that you can't necessarily delegate the entire project to, someone that maybe has experience working on that type of project and can kind of give you a place to start, or someone that can, okay, I can break off this piece for you and accomplish that. You go ahead and get started on this other part of your project. So having a partner, having a team, even if it's not someone below you that you can officially delegate something to, is helpful. But yeah, I would definitely say just knowing yourself and being realistic about what you can accomplish is probably the most important part of working as an individual, as not part of a team.
Yeah, I think there are things that I can't delegate. And there are things that I have to do myself, but I do, like Sarah mentioned, like you just have to send it out. And if you know it's at 90%, I do have that perfectionist, it has to look a certain way. I'm all about the aesthetics. Does it have the letterhead on it? Is it documented? This is the draft. We, as a department, started to realize that we had so many things in our drive, and we still do, that we were reinventing the wheel when we didn't have to. And so I always encourage a person to go back and see what was done. No, you don't need to copy exactly what was done, but you need to look at the reality of today. What are you working on today that's relatable to that past project, and how can you move forward with that project? And so there are times where I was just thinking about something last week I was working on, and I worked on it and I sent it out to everyone and I asked for their input, and I'm like, a deadline. I live by a deadline. What's the deadline before a conversation ends? What's the deadline on this? Hey, when I send something out to someone and I'm asking for people's feedback, hey, can you give me feedback by this point in time? And once that point in time gets there, I've moved on. I've looked at who gave me feedback, who put comments on the Google Doc, who didn't, and I moved on. And at that point, then you have to move forward with what you got. And so I think you made a valid point about just sometimes you just got to just do it, and just, okay, it's not what I want it to be, but maybe I can't delegate this to someone, but I can absolutely get other people's input. And, and that also makes things collaborative and makes people feel involved as well. So when you can't delegate, you can still get that feedback and get the project completed at the same time.
And all of this obviously just sounds like more work. And to a certain extent it is, but it is, like Joey said, it is an investment. Hopefully this is one of those things, if you choose to go down this path of sort of Google calendars and recurring events and things like that, it's almost to set it and forget it. You create it, you invest the time in creating that process and creating that system for yourself, and then stick to it. Tweak it as necessary, of course, to make it continue to work for you, but once you've made that initial investment, I think, in my experience at least, and it sounds like probably most people up here, you find that is worth the time that it saves you. It's worth the headache of having to go back and double check and triple check and follow up with people in so many different ways. Like, you have a system, build it so that it works for you, and build it so that you can trust it and work by it. If it, like I said, if it needs tweaking, tweak it, make it keep working. But it is an investment, and once you're done with it, I think it's worth it. So worth it.
I would also just add of like not being afraid to say no when you can, and like strategic, because obviously sometimes you just can't say no. But there are times when I think that what I think a lot of things that we experience too is that, like, as we merge teams and get new managers, sometimes you're overseeing something that somebody really doesn't know, like all the work that goes into it, because they've never been at a role where they needed to do those types of things. And so one thing that I've really learned to like what it really means to manage up in a way that is respectful and constructive and all of that, because I think there's a fine line, you know, and you like sometimes you just have to do it, and for the things that you can't delegate, you can't delegate. But I think what I do is I like to actually visually show the person of like, okay, so these are the things that you want. Here's what it's going to take to get those things done. And this is, you know, a projected timeline for that. Here are the things that I have to put on the back burner for that. Are you okay with that? To just like clarify, to say like, okay, this is what that means in practice. And they're being like, oh, wait, no. I actually need that to be here. And then it's like, okay, what are we taking off here then? And it's just being realistic about negotiating, I think, is super important. Because I think a lot of people, if you're not a person that is as apt to negotiating and to like saying that up front and trying to advocate for yourself, it's not easy. And the anxiety part of it makes people unable to really speak what they mean in their head. And I think that like that has been really helpful recently as we talk about like, okay, you know, now that we are a team of 2.5 and we used to be a team of 5 or 6, what does that actually mean, and how, like, what's realistic? Because, you know, at 5 o'clock I have class, my work stops, like I can't, whereas before I was a student, I would be able to stay very late. And so being realistic about like, here are my boundaries and here are my lines, and you know, how can we work within those boundaries? You know, how can I make this realistic for my job, and make sure that we're moving our department goals forward and dropping those things that we can drop. Because sometimes I feel like we do things because that's what we've always done. And I'm always about like asking the right questions of like, do we need to do that? And not because I'm trying to not do work, but because I want to make sure that the work that I'm doing really is moving us forward, and not just a part of we've always done this, so we're going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I value, you know, having the support, I think, to do that. And I know it's challenging, and I think it takes practice, and it's a learning, I think. But I think that's really key for this conversation.
We'll let Sarah have one last comment, and then we're going to break out and do just a few minutes of activity. We have some resources. If anyone needs to leave, we can give them to you now. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Well, the only thing I was going to add is to also be clear about what the deliverable is expected to be. When I'm assigned a project or a task by my supervisor, I usually try to repeat back to her what I think she's asking for. Because a lot of the time you can overthink a project and get involved into many more hours work than it necessarily required. Or just you're shooting in the dark and you're not really sure what they're expecting, and well, they really meant more this. So I just try to repeat back to everyone, this is what I think you're telling me to do. Is that correct? Do I, you know, and so at that moment before I leave the meeting, I have a good idea of exactly what's expected for me to deliver and by what deadline, as you indicated before. So that's it.
Great, thank you all.
Are you next to me? Okay. Are you in the very end of your? Yes, you are. Do you hear me talking? Am I really loud? Oh, they put up a board. Yeah. Sorry about that. Oh, I didn't even know you played music, so now. I can't hear a thing. So you're. I can hear you if I listen to Yeah, no, I didn't sing. I can hear it. That's okay. Normal office noise. Okay, so we have retirement dinner visualization. Okay. You can go ahead and read it. Okay. Yeah. Imagine it is your retirement dinner.
Would you like
your usual retirement dinner
a piece
with
of
your
the
family,
pie?
friends, and colleagues stand up and describe the type of person you are for them. So how would you like to be remembered?
So the
What do you want your children and friends to say about you? How would you like to be described by your colleagues? So we're going to work with the circle graph.
plan a retirement dinner visualization.
And it says,
For those of you that are joining us on the live stream, thank you so much for being here today. We are going to end the live stream at this point while the people that are in the room do a small activity. If you're interested in getting a copy of the activity, feel free to reach out to Elizabeth. For those of you that know me, my name is Alex Carlson. My last day at Illinois Tech is this week, but we did want to introduce one additional person who will be joining to work on DEAL.
Yes. So Tara Butterfield will be joining me in continuing the DEAL activities. So if you have ideas about topics you'd like to see, please contact the two of us. And Alex, thank you so much for all of your hard work and effort in executing this programming. On that note, thank you for joining us on the live stream. We hope to see you next time. You're welcome. And